learning about MBTI helped me find my peer group that helped me find a home. They have this saying, home is a place where all your efforts to escape cease. And I was able to find a place where I enjoyed being there enough to not want to escape. If you put yourself out there, you are giving your bat signal. When we are able to do things that we are proud of, then in and of itself, you will attract people who love your essence. You have something about you that no one else can bring to the table. While all of the technicalities could be different, like I'm sure during this interview with you, I could have said a billion things better. There's still the essence of us that's there. So the overall picture that we carry with us. And so people who like you will always be attracted to your essence, and the technicalities are negotiable. But the people who will actually like you will find you perfect in every iteration of your process. Perfectionism is your own standard for yourself, but your soulmates, you already reached their standard of perfection, because what makes you perfect is that you guys are just compatible from the essence up. People can always feel that. Like as an NFJ, you feel people's vibes. So your vibe will always be the right vibe for the people who like your vibe.
Hello everybody and welcome back to Illuminating Dialogues number 6. We have the pleasure of talking to Joyce Meng today. How are you, Joyce?
I'm doing good today.
Awesome.
How are you?
I'm doing very good, Joyce. So for those of you who do not know Joyce, Joyce is a certified MBTI master practitioner, Jungian typology expert, Enneagram coach, master NLP practitioner, and Gallup-Clifton strengths coach. And Joyce also hosts a YouTube video series called Type Talks, which I've personally been watching for the past over 1 year, and it's really nice to see all the personalities in kind of 4D. And if you're like me, who've just been watching or reading personality types, it's really nice to see the conversations between two people. And recently hit 12,000 subscribers. So congratulations, Joyce.
Thank you.
So before we really go into kind of MBTI, what is MBTI, what is personality, how can we use personality as a tool to navigate our life and culture? And then for people who are quite interested in this tool and want to use it practically, before we get into that, I was just wondering if you can just, for people who don't know you, introduce yourself, tell us a bit about your journey, how you got into this, and your journey into starting YouTube and Type Talks.
Yeah, the journey has been a wild ride. I believe it was actually Megan Lavoda. I was a coaching client of hers, and she's like, "You should make your own channel." And so I made it with the confidence of friends believing in me. And so it goes down to that woo-woo, everything good comes down to love story. And so it was the support of friends, the encouragement of people who I really admired that got me on this track. Now, what got me originally into MBTI was when I was 14, I was friends with an ENFP, and she was super into type, and she typed everyone, everything that could breathe. If it was living, it had a type. And so she um, she told me to get into this, and she typed me, even though that isn't the best thing to do to another person. And she's like, you could take online tests, but online tests could be wrong. I already know your personality type. And it was the same personality type I would have arrived at anyway, myself, independently. And so it's been a wild ride. It's been the longest standing hobby I've had in my life, the longest marriage in my life. And so they say that when you love something, instead of putting one foot in, one foot out, you go all in. And so that's the philosophy I'm applying towards type. And so they have this saying that if you've been looking at a dress for more than 4 months, it's more than just window shopping. So they say that if you've been crushing on someone for more than 4 months, it's actually you actually like that person. And so I applied that to type, and it's like, yeah, you know what? I actually really do like type, and I don't think it's just this phase.
Mm,
And so I decided to invest more into it. Typology is really fascinating to me because I've always been fascinated in personality theory.
mm,
I really find it impactful. It has changed my life because I didn't know why I was so different than my parents. My family members are, my mother is an ESFP and my dad's an ISTJ. And
okay.
so they're super concrete versions of these types. So they only talk about real things all the time. And so I really felt like the black sheep in my home, and I didn't know how to explain it. And so it's also Chinese culture can be a bit cold. And so I'm a kind of person that thrives on overt love. And so
Mm,
I found that I was really drawn to my ESFJ aunt,
mm,
and type made me realize why, because I really liked her extroverted feeling. And I was like, wow,
mm,
she's so warm. She's like the sun. It's like any room that she walks in, it radiates, and she makes sure to know that, to let you know that you're loved. And so I really enjoyed that. Um, yeah, so type is this through line. It's this cause, it's like this that line of best fit that helps you make sense of so many situations in your life, that it's like the color purple. You once you see it, you can't go back.
mm,
And so type is like you've been bitten by the bug and you can't be unbit. And so it's with you for life, and it's for the better in my case. And so I really love type because it can change lives, it can save lives, it can give you the biggest sigh of relief you've ever experienced because you're like, oh, that makes everything makes sense.
mm,
And I find that when we can make sense of things, then there is this level of calm because we feel like, oh, all these things that I have not understood and I've seen as threatening, or that people have seen as threatening in me, it's actually completely normal. So it makes you feel like you're not crazy. And so I feel like that's the kind of reassurance people need to feel okay. At least in my case, it was, and for a lot of people, I know it is too. And
absolutely.
so yeah, I just find that I love any way of categorizing personality, which is why I'm also into the Clifton strengths. And I even enjoy, Sims when you get to subscribe traits to your Sims. I just like any kind of analysis of human behavior. I find that it's fascinating.
And I wonder if that's so. Before I get too technical by jumping into NI and FE, thank you for sharing all that because I feel like to the audience who've been watching on this YouTube channel who've been primarily from South Asian background, let's say, and who might not be familiar with the personality system, but you've touched on things like INFJ, like ISTJ, like ESFJ. So we'll get into that a bit more. But you mentioned about culture and about how it made you feel comfortable and it could save lives, but it could also help people express in that way. It's also helped me, right? So as well in interviews, am I, you know, am I worried too much about if people like me or not, right? I know that's a very FE thing. Am I giving a lot of affirmations a lot? I can recognize that when I'm doing that, and I can be like, that's okay. That's a version of me. And if someone's not reacting the same way, I know that that's just because they're not embodying that space. So I just want to start this conversation by people who are tuning in live or people who are watching this after, that this can actually be used as a practical tool. And Joyce does a really nice thing on her YouTube channel of demonstrating that and showing that people are using these traits in a real way, and you get to see how they're doing that. So we did talk about culture here, and we talked about your YouTube channel. But before we step into culture, um, if you could just expand upon, starting your YouTube channel, what was your learnings from really inviting people on and learning about MBTI, and then if you could also describe what is MBTI for someone completely new to this.
Yeah. Myers-Briggs. So people say MBTI, what it's actually referring to is the instrument.
Mm.
And so it's actually Myers-Briggs type inventory, but
Okay.
it's coined as that. MBTI is used colloquially as the term to describe these are personality types, 16 of them,
Mm.
and they show us our general cognition, how we process information, and how we make decisions.
Mm.
So it is our filter for incoming data and outgoing action. And it gets you to understand yourself a little bit more and your inner workings. And so people tend to see MBTI as trait based, where it's like, oh, your behavior, but that's actually the 10% of Myers-Briggs. So what MBTI really is looking at your inner motivations, your why, and
Mm.
your core mechanisms. So it's not actually looking at behavior, which is a common misconception that people have when they think about it. Um, yeah, I think one of my biggest learnings from hosting panels is that you get to get to the sweet spot of what people want to share after an hour, which
Mm.
creates this dilemma. Do I make extremely long panels or do I keep them short, but then I haven't warmed people enough to hear the good stuff yet?
Mm.
And I find my learnings from the channel is that I think all people can grow in similar ways. And so when you see advice for how to grow, there are common growth paths for the personality types, but I think that we actually as human beings we grow from learning to open our hearts more. And I
Mm.
think some things are universal and some things are very type specific.
Mm.
So I'm going to be holding a series on letters to my younger self that each of the personality types go over. And you'll see how they differ, but
Mm.
ultimately we all look for love and belonging no
Mm.
matter what type we are. So there's that. What I like about personality type is that it's very illuminating. Some types think so differently than I do. Like if you look at ESTJs, they love to be obligated because
Mm.
they're a type with SJ in their code, and
Mm.
all SJ types, they actually, if you obligate them, even if they're tired or grumpy, they will finish the thing. They will follow through. So
Mm.
they're the most dutiful of all the dutiful types. And I'm like, that is very interesting. And with ESTJs, they can also be very blunt and they don't really consider emotions unless they've learned to over their life. So it's like something they've learned rather than something that's innate to them. Whereas for me, considering a person's emotions is by default. I do
Mm.
notice it, and I was born able to spot that and caring about that more than I notice ESTJs do naturally because it gets in the way of getting things done. Like the reason why an ESTJ will learn to be more subtle with people's emotions is usually because it helps them get things done better. So they're like, okay, I can be more effective if I'm nice to people's feelings. Or they realize that they piss people off so that they want to fix that. But
Mm.
it's for me, it's just a natural consideration. And I sugarcoat things too much to the point where I lose the bluntness and people actually need clarification when I talk too. Because I
Mm.
speak vaguely,
Mm.
whereas ESTJs speak really concretely. And
Mm.
so there's a difference there too. Although we can have our own form of being direct, like an INFJ is always going to be a very tactful direct,
Mm.
whereas an ESTJ is going to be a more direct if they're
Mm.
allowed to be that way.
Absolutely. And like I saw your interview this week with he was from Glasgow. Was it Alex, his name?
Yeah, I think so. Is it Leon, the INFP?
ESTJ. I believe he was doing the Belbin model as well. He was in
Oh
Scotland.
yeah, you're
Yeah.
right. Yeah,
So
Alex.
it was really nice to see how both of you were talking about personality. And so personality can't necessarily tell you what job to do, but you were both talking on the same topic. But I could see that he was talking more on a KPI point and he was using that TE to leverage, okay, if humans are happy in their role, then they'll be more productive. And whereas that FE or maybe NIFE approach was saying, well, that would benefit their human potential and the growth of the human. So it was really interesting to see the same topic but different perspectives. And so people watching this who are new to MBTI, noticing, hey, um, how are you viewing reality in this way? How are you viewing your life through this lens, and how are other people viewing life through another lens? So I thought that was a really nice demonstration of talking about the same points, but but with
Exactly.
different personalities.
Yeah, we're both NFs here, so we are motivated by helping people reach their human potential.
Yes.
And when you know someone's type, you actually know how to motivate them. You're
Mm.
like, this thing will get you to want to improve. And so it's one tool to become the best version of yourself with. And I realized that I didn't explain what the dichotomies meant to people, so maybe I should go through that really quickly.
Yes, but maybe before we do that, Joyce, I was just wondering, um, obviously, like we were talking about the black sheep, um, and even like not in a family system, but even people, like for example, I've got friends and they're interested in MBTI, but they're like, really, how can all humanity be fit within 16 boxes, right? Or I don't want to be fit in a box, or is there some nuance here? So maybe before we talked about the dichotomies, maybe we could also talk to how we can actually use this as a tool and how it's not maybe putting people in boxes here.
Yeah, I I don't see MBTI as putting people into boxes. I see MBTI as a filter for incoming information and outgoing action.
Mm.
So when you understand your filters better, you know what is creating certain biases that you might have that other people may not have. And so I think it's actually a really interesting look at people.
Mm.
So let's say right-handed and left-handed. If you're like, you can't fit people into two boxes, or you can't even fit people into three boxes because there's ambidextrous too. Well, technically you can. Some that you're either right-handed, left-handed, or ambidextrous. And you'll fit into one of those.
True.
And maybe there's a nuanced category that I'm not sure exists out there
Yet.
yet. Yeah. So you could see your personality type as your right-handed or left-handed. It'll change how you eat cereal or how you use scissors, but it doesn't encapsulate you as a totality.
Mm.
So it is true. I think that every human being does have an MBTI type, but I don't think you are only your MBTI type.
Mm.
Just like you are not just your gender, you're not just your right hand, you're not just your eyesight. It's a facet of who you are. And it could be a huge part of your life depending on how much you lean into it,
Mm.
but it's just a quality of yours.
Mm.
And so I would say it's not a box because it's not meant to limit you to anything.
Mm.
So you can be an ENFJ, but you can be your own special type of ENFJ.
Right.
So type is your skeleton, and you fill out that. So
Mm.
you actually are all of the substance within that. So the amount of substance you could fill an exoskeleton with
Mm-hmm.
is endless.
Wow.
And so it's not a box because there's endless variety within a certain type.
Mm. That's really brilliantly explained, and it's more fluid how people can interact with it. And then I was also wondering, why is it only 16, or is it much more complicated than meets the eye? Because a lot of people would be like, well, then this is a belief system that I'm believing into.
Yeah, it depends on your school of thought. Some people don't believe in 16 types, so they'll say they're 32 or then 256, and then
Mm.
you'll go into the thousands. So you could really get very granular with it. There are even brain scans being done on people of different personality types, and it's found that you have four subtypes.
Mm.
So there's dominant, creative, normalizing, harmonizing. I am a creative subtype with harmonizing auxiliary. So you can actually have a dominant brain pattern and then a secondary brain pattern that's emerging in your brain. And
Right.
so I am the flavor of INFJ that has also that brain pattern within INFJs. So
Mm.
technically every INFJ has four types. Is that I am not good at math. I do not want to guess what number that would equal to. But that is just to illustrate that there are so many subtypes within a personality type, which is another reason for why it's not a box. Because if you have so many categorizations within a type, and you can even go more granular from there,
Hmm.
it's like it's not really a box because in reality, the 16 types can be divided into millions of subcategories.
Hmm.
So is it really a box?
Exactly.
Like,
And
would you say a shade of color is a box? Because there's blue, and then there's light blue, and then there's super light blue, and then you can have like billions of shades in between if
mm,
you went granular enough. So you wouldn't say that a color is boxing you in because there's so many different shades, just like there are so many different shades of human beings.
mm, really nicely explained. And if you're coming from this from a Indian lens or philosophical lens, you'll know that the if you know Ayurveda, that the macro world and the micro world mimic each other. So there'll be a nice interplay where the more you zoom in, the more complexity you get, and the more you zoom out, the more complexity you get, just like our universe. So you can think and type or any other schools of thought regarding anything, labeling anything can be multifaceted and multidimensional. So yeah, I'm really keen on now hearing about what you were talking about the dichotomies and exploring that a little.
Yeah. When it comes to the dichotomies, the first one is introversion and extroversion.
Mm,
And so this is where you focus and direct your energy. With extroverts, they focus and direct their energy externally. And so they use it to observe social situations, to interact with their surroundings, to connect with their surroundings, to be productive around
mm,
them. And so ultimately it's externally focused, whether it's relationally focused, task oriented, stimulation oriented. It's all looking outside yourself for stimulation. Whereas for an introvert, it's someone who focuses and directs their energy internally.
mm,
And so it's all about reflection, pondering, refining your inner mind's contents, getting clarity inside your own mind by yourself
mm,
on things that only you specifically care about in that moment. So it's like you're trying to disconnect yourself from external stimulation so you can get a clearer read on what's going on inside yourself. That is what introversion is.
mm,
And we both have everyone has all sides. So we're all somewhat extroverted and somewhat introverted. It's just about where you primarily direct your energy. So just like if you're right-handed, you can somewhat use your left hand. It's not impossible. You just prefer to use your right hand.
mm.
And some people might be like, oh, I see an E in my code, so I must only be an extrovert. And it's like that was not Carl Jung's intention. Carl Jung actually has this quote: if anyone is a pure extrovert or a pure introvert, that person would be in a lunatic asylum
Mm,
because no one would be able to operate being fully one way all the time.
mm,
And so we're actually both introverts and extroverts, but we lean and we prefer a side. So that's what makes us an extrovert. It's not that we're lacking the other side, it's just that our focus is directed on one of the sides.
right.
And I am totally overcomplicating this, but I realize that that's a common counter
Misconception.
argument.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
So,
and yeah, because I notice that people say I'm an extrovert only or I'm an introvert only, and yeah, it was really helpful the way you explained it because it's kind of clear that humans have all of these energy patterns available to them, and it's just natural. Maybe it's the way they're born, of how they express this naturally, and so MBTI as a tool can actually help them as a ENFJ want to help people. So MBTI is a tool for people to use and to be like, oh, hey, what is my energy pattern here? Oh, I'm getting really drained out. Why is that? Or I feel like I'm not getting enough stimulation here. Why is that? So MBTI and Joyce's channel can help you explore that a bit more deeply, right?
oh, I appreciate the shout out.
Yeah.
And so MBTI is all about preferences. So
Mm,
it's not about capability. We're capable of doing all things. It's just about what you lean towards and what's easiest for you.
mm,
So an exercise to see this in yourself is you could try signing a piece of paper with your dominant hand
mm,
and then try signing a piece of paper with your non-dominant hand. And you'll describe the experience. With your dominant hand, it's effortless, it's autopilot. Whereas with your non-dominant hand, it is more work. You have to be conscious of it, and it's a
mm,
little clumsy at times because you don't always use it, and it's not your most natural process.
mm.
So that brings us to intuition versus sensing, which is the
Yes.
second dichotomy in MBTI. This is if you focus more on abstract, conceptual information versus concrete, practical, sensible information.
Mm,
So with intuitives, they tend to think about the abstract ponderings of life a lot, and that's what they like to do on the downtown and also with other people. And an intuitive is more likely to be accused of making the conversation too deep, too quick.
yeah.
It's because they want to get to the substance and the meat of it, which is getting to know the core of the thing
Mm,
or the idea behind the thing. Intuitives also like to understand the many perspectives behind a topic. So they'll look at a topic and see it from the different angles in which you could see it. So intuitives like the thought exercise of thinking something through completely
mm,
and contemplating it and intellectualizing it.
mm,
With sensing, there's a desire to make it real, to make it practical, to make it concrete. And so with sensing, there is this desire to talk about things that you can actually do in the real world.
mm,
So with sensing, it's a focus on what is observable and what is verifiable. So what can we verify and see with our five senses or with our practical knowledge of the world? So what are we experiencing right now and what have we experienced? So that's very concrete information,
mm,
our experiences. Whereas for intuitives, they're more about what is the overarching theme, the overarching ideas that underlie this. So that intuitives like the speed and depth of meaning and insight. So they don't really care as much for the verifiability and reliability.
mm. And I
And again,
told,
we have both sides of these in ourselves. We just lean on one of the sides.
yeah, absolutely. And it's always good to point that out each time because I think our mind likes to be like, oh, yeah, I'm totally this. And I totally relate to that because INFJs, for example, so my sister's an INFJ. Often she'll explain it like, and I hope it's okay that I'm saying this, Tira, live. She'll often say it's like a security camera, where I'm often in a conversation, but I feel like I'm really detached, and I'm noticing everyone's patterns in the conversation. I'm thinking about why the conversation is occurring and everyone's body language inside. But sometimes I'm a bit like detached from the conversation actually occurring in the details. Um, so like if there's anyone out there who experiences this, like MBTI can actually be a great tool to also like understand what type of conversations are you naturally drawn to and kind of where you would like to expend your energy as well. Because I also find MBTI, and we're going to talk about this in navigating life and culture, as a good way to give yourself permission and also give other people permission. Because often if you're surrounded by people who maybe don't use these traits in the same way you do, that you might find yourself closing off part of yourself, and you might find yourself kind of reserving parts of yourself. And so, yeah, that's why MBTI can actually be a good way for you to have some level of self acceptance, I would say.
Mm.
So is there anything else you'd like to say on that dichotomy?
Exactly. I think that if you have a romantic partner or someone you interact on a day-to-day basis with that has a very different MBTI type than you might notice those differences a lot.
Hmm.
So there's a fun fact here. Uh, there are some couples that go to couples counseling. Let's say it's an ENFP and an ISTJ.
Hmm.
They realize that, oh, the intuition versus sensing gap can really show up because the ENFP is like, I always want to meet my human potential. I always want to self-actualize. And then the ISTJ is like, why can't you be stable? Why can't you be predictable? Why can't you be safe? And why do you always restless? Why can't
Mm.
you be more okay with what you already have? And so type really helps us realize where our dissatisfactions from certain relationships come from, and then it provides us a path to fixing it too. So,
Amazing.
yeah,
Yes. So, are you happy to go to thinking versus feeling?
absolutely.
Nice.
So, when it comes to thinking versus feeling, this is the primary metric you use to make decisions.
Mm-hmm.
So for thinking types, they like to use impersonal metrics. So it's like, what are the pros and cons of this? What is the return on investment? What is the expected value of this? This is all thinking language.
Mm.
And so emotions is just one metric out of many metrics to consider in decision making. Whereas for a feeler, emotions and the human dignity is the first metric in decisions naturally. So feelers make decisions based off of compassion and values first.
Mm.
Whereas it's this is where the difference shows up. And you'll see it in the ways that people process situations. So a I'll give you a really extreme example. I'll have some TJ clients of mine. So let's say an ISTJ or an ENTJ that will bring me a spreadsheet of how they're going to go about dating people and what specific logical criteria they need to meet before
Mm.
they date them. And so that's a extreme example of thinking. It's like, wow, you really need some proof to like someone. It's like, I don't trust my feelings.
Okay.
I don't trust other people's feelings. I need the cold, hard data to line up.
Mm.
And so a feeler is more likely to be like, what are the vibes of this situation? How are people feeling about this? And how do I account for that in decision making? So it's more personal.
Mm. And as a
Yeah.
coach, I feel that's like really interesting because I've been coaching recently a lot of ENFJs, my own personality type. So it's been finding it very easy to communicate with and understanding what are your values, why are you doing things. So it becomes much more easy. But my day to day work, if I'm interacting with ST types, making emotional arguments, making arguments based on, like you said, human dignity can be very hard because to them, it's a very qualitative point of view and they're wanting very quantitative facts. So, whether it be in a work situation, whether it be in a relationship situation, even a friendship, like even going out to a restaurant, right? I don't know, this could show up there. MBTI could be a great tool in just bridging that gap and understanding why you're even making decisions. If you're purchasing a car, if you're purchasing a house, why are you making a decision for that, right? So it can even make it helpful for you to understand these different perspectives. Um, so I don't know if there's anything you wanted to say around thinking or feeling, because I know that can be a terminology that's used in the outside world as like thinking and feeling, but in MBTI has a slightly different, concept.
Absolutely. So when it comes to thinking and feeling, all feelers think and all thinkers feel.
Mm.
That's where a misconception can happen. And thinkers, when they get emotional, can actually get over emotional. So if you catch a thinker in a grip and they're acting uncharacteristic of themselves, they can be actually heavily emotional in a volatile way that they feel out of control of themselves.
Mm.
So thinkers can feel a lot, but when they feel a lot, they feel out of control. They're
Mm.
like, oh, this feels so like I'm not able to make decisions rationally. But they can even appear more emotional than a feeler in those little spikes that they have.
Mm.
Whereas for a feeler, feelers are so natural with emotions that they don't feel out of control when they're in emotions. They feel like they're in their element. And so feelers might actually be calmer in moments of like a thinker having a emotional spike. Of course,
Mm.
all people can have emotional spikes, but I noticed that it doesn't have to do with how much you feel because all people can feel a lot. It's a human phenomenon, but it's what you do with all of this information.
Mm.
So a thinker eventually, when they get control of themselves, will want to suppress their feelings to make a more logical choice. But we're humans, so we're not completely rational.
Mm.
There's a saying that we're just we have a thin layer of rationality covering our irrational core because we're like mostly lizard brain or monkey brain, but we cover it with our supposed rationality. So we're all illogical in our own special way.
Right. That's very nice to see. And it's also like choosing what we identify with as well. Like, do we identify with one part, or do we identify with another? Because when someone meets us in the outside world and we find, oh, we don't really click that with that type of person, I think Carl Jung pointed to in individuation process. So if we haven't met that part of ourself deeply, then chances are we'll also get slightly triggered by that person that shows that in the outside world. So it can be a good self-reflection, so that the self-reflection inside us can point um, to the connecting to the other in the outside world. So am I right in saying that that is a link there?
Absolutely. That's so true.
Okay.
Another way that you can kind of see thinking and feeling is uh, so you are an ENFJ,
Mm-hmm.
and with ENFJs, they can be very thoughtful
Mm.
and have great thoughts, but there could be an insecurity or uncertainty about how smart you are or
Yeah.
how smart you're coming across to other people. So it's not really about if you think or feel, but it can be your level of certainty around how good you are at
Mm.
that or how good other people perceive you to be at that.
Yeah.
So,
And I'm really like interested to delve into a bit of INFJ and ENFJ things as well, because I know that's like a TI thing. And that would be super helpful for like any of the guys I'm coaching or will be coaching to watch this video as well, who are ENFJs or INFJs who struggle with certain challenges. So yeah, let's jump to the last dichotomy then of judging and perceiving. Yeah, sounds really weird. What is that?
yeah, judging and perceiving is do you do you organize the external world
Mm,
so that you can free roam in your internal world, or do you free form your external world and let loose there, but you're very heavily organized inside?
mm,
And so it's where you're organized. And so when it comes to judging types, they tend to be more structured, more organized, more planned. Being an NFJ, we might be a little bit more fluid with planning because it's more of a conceptual plan, but it's still having an idea of what's coming up and then tackling it
mm,
when it comes up with having thought about it beforehand. So there is this level of wanting order in your world around you. Whereas for perceivers, they actually like to go with the flow and they run the marathon 100 meters at a time. So they're not thinking about the end. They're just like 100 meters at a time.
mm,
And so they're free form in the external world, a little bit chaotic sometimes too,
mm.
because of the lack of structure can induce chaos, but that has a negative connotation. So I would say it's more of a
Creative?
perceivers are like creative,
Mm,
yeah. You could use that too. But I guess like judges and perceivers have their own form of creativity.
mm,
Like I know ISTJs and INTJs who are artists, but they're creative by painting every day. And I'm like, that's like a very planned behavior because you're
mm,
intentionally. So a word that I would associate with judging is intentionality. Because you have an idea of what's coming up, there is a level of intentionality behind it. Whereas for perceiving types, they tend to be more spontaneous, more adventurous, more open to whatever surprise is coming up. They're more adapting and improvising. Even if they may not see themselves that way, the people in their lives know that they operate that way.
mm,
So you can kind of observe all of these dichotomies loosely in other people. And so sometimes we are the best read of our own personality. Sometimes other people are seeing something that we're not seeing. So yeah. That was my Spark Notes version of explaining these
mm.
dichotomies.
No, thank you so much. And it's just nice to give a bit of a context before like delving into some of the more juicy details of maybe ENFJ and INFJ that we'll go into because I'm super excited about that. But before we go into that, you mentioned, you're from a Chinese background. I'm from Indian background. I started this YouTube channel by picking up a book in the library called The History of Sikhs. And I did a journey of really like South Asians going, actually humans entering the South Asian subcontinent and the culture expanding. And how did the culture evolve? And then after that, that was called Punjabi Lore series. I did a second series on my grandparents' journey about them coming from Punjab after partition, coming from the UK. And what I found, okay, that excited my FE, extroverted feeling, and NI. But what I found was a pattern emerging through the first generation, through the second generation, through the third generations, and so on, where there's a lot of cultural influences. There'll be a lot of pressure to succeed coming from immigrant communities. There's a lot of difference in cultural integration occurring, especially coming to the West. And I find MBTI can be a very powerful tool, especially for those who are coming from diaspora, coming from immigrant communities, to really integrate their culture, to really understand the challenges to self actualize and realize, hey, I don't actually need to have this pressure to fit into maybe this stereotypical type of job role, but I can understand what is the energy pattern in me and how can I actually step into my power here. So I'm just wondering. So for me, this has been really helpful, as an engineer now transitioning into a more coaching role, um, uh, stepping into my FE and NI and really owning that. I'm just wondering for you, was this helpful in a cultural context, especially in a Chinese context, and and using your NFs, and what was that journey really like?
Yeah. With Chinese households, the collective type is probably STJ or SFJ, depending on your household. It's just very SJ
Mm-hmm.
because it's a lot about respecting the past, respecting your elders, having a level of honoring tradition, honoring authority, honoring what has been.
Mm.
And it's all about having certain routines too that are embedded in the culture. And so I found that it was really helpful for me to learn about my personality type because I live in a very STJ household. And so I found that when I was not being productive in an extroverted thinking way, I would get punished and they'd say, I'm going to send you to military boot camp, Chinese
Yeah.
military boot camp. And so I was like, wow, there's this culture that really exonerates productivity.
Mm.
And there's also this you have to call people by honorifics too, which
Mm.
is fine. And it's very polite, it's very a formal culture, I would say, with Chinese culture. I think that there's some commonalities with Indian culture, except Indian culture has a bit of NFJ-ness.
Mm.
So I heard that from some people who have visited India. I can't verify
Mm.
that there's a little bit of a ENFJ perspective there
Mm.
too, because of the you mentioned Ayurveda and other things like that.
Mm.
I'm like, that could be very ENFJ.
Yeah.
And so yeah, your culture has a lot of spirituality. Whereas I think with Chinese people, the equivalent is Buddhism.
Mm.
And but I still find they practice it in a very SJ way too. So they take out the spirituality from it, at least where I have participated in it.
Mm.
So I found that it was really helpful to know my type because then I knew why I was so different than the people around me. I'm like, wow, I like thinking about the human condition, human dignity, human potential. Where are humans going? And what are the cycles that we participate in that we could make healthier from the root up?
Mm.
So I was thinking about these things since a little age. And I had teachers saying like she's an old soul.
Mm.
Um, and you could say that an SJ is an old soul too because they're practical old souls. Like an ESTJ will take care of their family from a very young age. But I mean old soul in the sense that I like to think about things that typically people who are 50 like to think about, like philosophical pursuits of life.
Mm-hmm.
And so I found that I wanted to have conversations that would help me grow. And so I couldn't do that in my household, and that killed me a little bit inside.
Mm,
And so learning about MBTI helped me find my peer group that helped me find a home.
mm,
They have this saying, home is a place where all your efforts to escape cease. And I was able to find a place where I enjoyed being there enough to not want to escape.
mm,
And so that's what type helped me with. It was finding a home, finding my chosen family, finding peace.
mm,
So what peace is to me is when you're able to have a place that you can be your whole self in, and it's not shamed or ridiculed or looked down upon. And so I felt like before then, I could only exist as fragmented pieces. I had to be this version of myself, this mask, or people please this way. But now that I have people who I can be all sides of myself with, I don't feel the need to have to put on masks around them. And that's the most liberating feeling. And so it's, yeah, not having to feel crazy for being your personality type is one of the gifts that personality type gives you.
mm,
There's that phrase, once you can name it, you can claim it. And so I felt that way about type. Now that I can name it, I can find ways to honor this more fully.
mm. And
So,
I think that really, yeah, thank you for sharing that because, like, speaking to that, honoring that, and then also noticing if shame is occurring to that. Because I think a lot of people would relate to that if they're coming from certainly cultural backgrounds who are, let's say, pressured to go down a certain route or pressured in a certain environment that hey, there's actually a tool here that you can actually use to step into and be like, hey, this is a talent here or this is a form of communication and it's okay to step into that. And it's really powerful to hear you say, help me find my group, my tribe, my people, also influencing your career path or your purpose or your job role, right? So it has a really multi-dimensional approach, and it's not just like a tool to like, hey, your triangle fit in here, but it's more like, how can I use this in a way to open me up wider and wider and wider, so I can, like you said, not the different masks or fragmented parts, but really to bring all these parts together into a nice circle, which is ultimately what individuation, I believe, is about. Um, So I'm wondering next. I don't know if you want to speak about anything else about the cultural influences and challenges to self actualize that you found. Um, maybe people of certain immigrant populations or from different cultures face.
yeah, I think one of the challenges to self-actualization for some immigrant families is that you realize that you'll never really be close to your family members.
Mm,
At least that was the case for me. So I find that with Chinese culture, it's a very silent culture. Even the extroverts in this culture are not really talkative with their family members.
mm,
And so it's like I've never had my parents ask me, "How are you?" in my life
mm,
to just see, to check in, to know how I'm doing about
mm,
anything. It was more about, are you getting married yet? Are you finished school yet?
mm,
It's more very task-oriented culture. And so I realized that I'm never going to have the relationship with my parents that I want. I'm a person who loves hugs. I love physical affection
mm.
or words of affirmation. Well, at least from the people that I like. Like it's like, especially if they're close circle. And I find that my parents are just not about physical touch. They're just not about words of affirmation.
Mm,
So, like, I can think of zero times my family members have ever complimented me with
mm.
anything. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And in Indian culture as well, like we can also notice that, okay, what part is cultural here? What part is, you know, MBTI focused? Because I think it could be quite helpful before we move on to like INFJ to ENFJ examples about, what is defining culture? Because I know that you're quite interested in culture and seeing how that influences with with MBTI. But I'm just wondering, if I'm an ENFJ from Scotland with an Indian background, and there's a Chinese ENFJ, and there's a Brazilian ENFJ, how is culture going to influence us? Like what is culture?
It really can impact a person.
Mm-hmm.
I've met Chinese and Japanese ENFPs and ENFJs, and they're so toned down
Mm.
because Japan has such an introverted culture. It's actually rude to look in your eyes and talk to you as a shopkeeper in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just interesting. The extroverts there look like what you would stereotype as an introvert
Mm-hmm.
because they are not gregarious, not expressive, not animated, like where you would see in North America. People are more likely to be that way. And so culture really does change what is appropriate. And especially as an ENFJ, you're going to mold yourself to what is socially appropriate.
Mm.
So that is going to really differ depending on your location that you're at.
Mm. Absolutely.
And so culture has a personality type of its own that can overlay on you.
Mm. Yeah, I,
So you
I
can
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, there's a meta type to a lot of things. So if you look at a family structure, you can actually add everyone's types together, and then you add a times two point for the powerful figures in the household, and then you have the family type. And so that actually influences how your type shows up too.
Wow, that's so interesting. Because often we think of cultures as countries, but culture, don't know if you've read a Gabor Mate book called The Myth of Normal, but he sort of talks about culture being like a bacteria on a petri dish and the nutrients like affecting or shaping that bacteria. So although culture we can't see, and this is really speaking to the NFs out there, we can't see, we can feel it. You can feel that culture around you, and you can maybe feel it with that FE, I guess, about how the vibes are when you step into a room, how the vibe of the culture is, and that whether you like it or not will shape the way you act and your gregariousness, I guess. And that was super interesting about the family is that times two or times 2.5. I never realized that. Um, so yeah, like jumping to like using MBTI, like getting in depth and practical with INFJ and ENFJ function examples that I've been excited about. Um, I've had a bunch of uh, ENFJs and coaching ENFJs, and a bunch of things have come up. But I think for people who are not familiar with ENFJs and INFJs, I think it could be helpful just to explaining what is NI, introverted intuition, and what is FE, extroverted feeling, and then maybe just touching on the bottom two functions as well.
Yeah, sure. With introverted intuition, it is looking at the essence of something, the meaning, the underlying meaning. So you're looking at what does this really mean? Whatever you see, you're asking yourself, why? And so you're trying to figure out the deeper why that makes the thing exist. So, or makes that thing operate in the way that it operates.
Mm,
So you notice the phenomenon happening. What is underlying the phenomenon to make this happen? And so introverted intuition is this drilling down, this looking at the systemic root of something, especially when it's paired with introverted thinking too. And so there's this desire to look at the human condition, but to
mm,
get at the heart of it, to get at the crux of it. And introverted intuition is also known for its long-term projections into the implications of something. So now that you know the root of something, you can see how the implications ripple down the chain effect. And so you kind of understand the this thing and how it is really connected to something larger to itself. So you're almost understanding the root of the systemic issues. So it's Yeah, there's that. Man, I slept 2 hours last night, so if I'm stumbling over my words, that is totally why.
That's okay.
And yeah, and so when it comes to introverted intuition, it is a process that is slowing down. All your introverted functions slow down in order to take in something fully. And so all the extroverted functions are a little faster and more broad. So that brings us to extroverted feeling.
Mm,
FE, you're looking at the group standards, the group group ethos, and what would be the best move for everyone. So this is how people should treat each other, how people should act with one another, and what goes against the best way to act towards one another. So
mm,
FE is looking at, hey, this is the group average of the vibes. How can I make sure that these vibes are operating well?
right.
So operate is more of a thinker word, so you can take that out, but like FE is looking at the vibes and like really like people's well-being
Mm.
and hey, how can I take care of this?
Yeah, it seems really subjective because, like, someone might ask, how does that get created, right? Is that just something that grows up in childhood? Because obviously different cultures will have different FEs, so I guess it tunes to the environment, right?
Yeah. So different environments have different cultures, and FE will figure out a way that's socially appropriate to work within that culture. But ultimately, I think FE is when, I talked about judging earlier on in our interview.
Mm,
So FE is you're really trying to create an emotional atmosphere that is harmonious for as many people as possible.
mm,
And so I think it's quite intrinsic actually, because you're organizing the external world by creating more harmony in the external world so that you can then be at more peace with yourself. I'm over intellectualizing this, aren't I?
no, I'm loving it.
But I'm really saying that I think FE is actually, it solidifies from a very young age.
Mm,
So it is influenced by your culture, but I think where it's created is I think it's either innate or it's developed so early on
mm,
that you don't have memories of when you didn't have it if you
mm.
have it in a strong placement. Like for you, since FE is your first function, you FE by default.
Yes.
It's just it's the air you breathe. The normal everyday occurrence.
Yeah,
So,
exactly. And just because we've been through these two, FE and NI, just for people watching this, like like you said, I'm embodying FE right now. So if you notice at the start of this interview, I was probably more gregarious than I was now. I was very inviting. My voice tone was probably a bit more softer. Probably is still soft. Um, and so that could maybe be characterized as FE more. And I don't know if you want to point to the NI in yourself, Joyce, for people to get that practical example.
yeah. When I'm using my introverted intuition, I'm kind of looking at behaviors about the human condition
Mm-hmm.
and contemplating it. So I'm like, why do human beings do that? I'm like, what do people get out of that? And what creates those kind of thought patterns? I think the second that I meet someone, I'm trying to figure out their theory of mind. Like, why do you think the way that you think? And how do you think about the things that you think?
Mm,
So I like to understand the theory behind a person
right.
and how that causes them to operate in the world.
Mm,
That's what intimacy is for me. It's understanding someone's mental landscape.
mm.
And so that's how it shows up in me.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And like you were saying about NI as well, like you were saying, potentially over intellectualizing, but for other types, for example, for me, who really admire NI, we don't see it as over intellectualizing. We would see it as putting words to things that we sometimes feel or get insights for, but we can't put into words. So it's really, you know, we hold that in high regard, and especially I think as ENFJs, we really look up to that being put in words because it's just something sometimes we can't do. And I know that from a lot of conversations with my sister as well. Um, and so moving on to SE and TI, if you could maybe just talk about that a bit and how that shows up in us.
Yeah. When it comes to SE and TI, introverted thinking is this process of using deductive reasoning to arrive at principles. And so it's like, hey, you can deduce that this and this and this is wrong through the process of elimination. So these are things that are standing. Introverted thinking is examining logical principles. And so this often works with our introverted intuition. So we're looking at the human condition, and then the FE is looking at the people, in particular, relational issues. And then the TI is like, how can I string this to make logical sense? So the TI is used in service of the NI and FE.
Hmm.
So it's like, how can I understand this issue or understand people's brains and the logic behind that?
Hmm.
So with introverted thinking, it is, does this make sense?
Yeah.
And thinking about, okay, does this part make sense, but that part doesn't make sense, but this does. So it's like analysis of all the logical parts. And it doesn't necessarily, it's not towards a practical means.
Hmm.
It's just to understand something and its logical roots as deeply as you can.
It's like a troubleshooting function, kind of.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you could see all the thinking functions as problem-solving functions.
Hmm.
So it's your TI and your TE that like to troubleshoot and problem solve.
Okay. And I think you said it quite nicely there. How we had different um, yeah, different abilities, and of course in INFJ and ENFJs, they their functions are kind of flipped around, so that TI would be in a lower position for me, the fourth function, and the TI for you would be in that third function. And just before we go into SE, you pointed out very interestingly how in an ENFJ this could also cause certain lack of confidence maybe in their um, thought process or in their intellectual ability. So before we get into other, let's say, ENFJ or INFJ topics, how could that show up? You know, having that TI in the fourth function, how does that show up in that ENFJ versus an INFJ?
Yeah, so I mentioned how for the ENFJ, they have an insecurity or uncertainty around how logical they're coming across to other people. And so with the INFJ, they have a little bit less of that issue. So an ENFJ is going to be more insecure about how their logic is. And it could also be that FE is also going, so for an ENFJ, you might want to hear way more people's opinions about something
Hmm,
if you're dealing with something that you're logically puzzling out. You're like,
exactly.
what are you thinking about this? What are you thinking about this? Whereas an INFJ is going to ask less people
Hmm,
because they trust themselves to figure it out a little more. And because an ENFJ's extroverted sensing is higher up, they're going to go out and experience more things. So they just put themselves out there. Sometimes ENFJs give themselves to a lot of people, and then over time, they hone in more on their NI, and then they become more discerning about who they actually want to spend their time with. Or instead of just automatically helping people, they take that step back and they're like, okay, am I living in a way that's sustainable? So introverted intuition deals with sustainability. So it's like, is the way that I'm living life sustainable? Is the way that I'm helping people sustainable? Is the way that I'm spreading myself sustainable?
hmm,
Because ENFJs, if they get too into their extroverted zone, can spread themselves thin. And then
hmm.
they realize I've been spreading myself thin too much.
That's so true. Because
Hmm.
something I relate to and something that um, a lot of ENFJs like have written here that I've coached and they've asked some questions like spreading myself too thin and people pleasing is something that I've had to work with, um, and is a thing because I think FE wants to help a lot of people, help people for free, and help, but it's not sustainable. And something that's come up in coaching conversations is sustainable productivity, how can I be sustainable but use my talents at the same time? So I don't know if you could speak to that people pleasing ability in ENFJ, and how can they use their talents but do so, like you said, sustainability wise? And how do INFJs, um, what challenges do they face? Do they have the same challenges or not really?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when it comes to people pleasing, a way to tackle that is to see what you would actually personally want to do as an individual. So, because an ENFJ's attention is on other people, they very rarely actually spend a lot of time on themselves, just for themselves. And so, self-care, it's a word that's thrown around so much that it means all sorts of things today.
Mm,
Self-care gets stereotypically connotated with taking warm baths or having something material. But I would say a real form of self-care is creating a life that's sustainable for you so you don't feel burnt out, so you don't feel drained at the end of the day. So self-care is taking care of your future self.
mm,
So it's thinking, what does my future self want? And how can I make that sustainable for my future self?
mm,
So I think that that is something that people who have people-pleasing qualities could focus on. And also give yourself time to pause before helping people. So if you notice yourself jumping into helping people real fast, pause and get used to saying, hey, that seems like a good idea. Let me think on it. And then give yourself a day or two to see if that's actually something your future self wants to get entangled in.
mm. Yeah, this is
And
gold
so
because NI helps that kind of detachment, right? So that NI would use time to be able to say, hey, I want to separate myself from the FE and say, is this good for me? Because from my perspective, I'm always trying to make decisions from that helping, helping, helping. And it's weird because then that kind of shame or guilt can be like, hey, but then why am I doing things for myself and not helping others? So in an ENFJ mind, that can be helping. Sorry, I cut you off there.
I, yeah, I think that that's a wonderful application. Um, yeah, and so when it comes to people pleasing, I think extroverted feeling users are more predisposed to it.
Mm,
I would say extroverts in general are more predisposed to it too, because extroverts focus and direct their energy to the external world. So they're more likely to abandon their inner world to go help other people too. So it could also be a cultural thing. In certain cultures, you're told that you have to be warm and friendly and help people all the time. So we
mm.
have billions. Okay, that's an overstatement, but we have many cultures actually impacting us at once.
Mm,
There's our culture stereotypically, which is our background that we come from. For me, it's Chinese, but
mm,
we have our work culture, our family culture, we have whatever new scenario we're entering, that place has a culture. And so we are a combination of these many things that we interact with on a daily basis, which is why we're such a unique expression of our personality type.
mm,
So that's why it's stereotypes can be funny because you can create humor out of more caricaturized versions of types, but it's not always accurate because of all these little variables that make up a person. Like I mentioned, we have lots of cultures impacting us. When it comes to INFJs, they suffer less from people pleasing than an ENFJ would go through. Because an INFJ at the end of the world has some ability to tune into the inner world and to be like, okay, I'll get myself tied into this up to a certain point. I find with INFJs, their problem comes from they don't make enough of an impact on the world. And so they have all these amazing ideas, all these beautiful things to say, but they can overthink and they may not put themselves out into the world.
mm,
And so you have these INFJs that are full with potential, but they just need that push to catalyze it, to influence the world or influence the people in their lives. Because an INFJ can feel invisible or that they need a lot of time to rev up to really bring themselves out to the world. So an INFJ's problem is actually inaction.
Mm,
And that can be bettered by incorporating extroverted sensing into their life
mm,
and acting more in their life and just throwing themselves in things. And also, INFJs can benefit from putting themselves in situations where they can make a change
mm,
because they bring so much valuable gold to a situation. So an INFJ, believe in your gold and go out, go forth into the world. I'm trying to set an example because I do have those fears within me, and I've lived a lot of my life making less of an impact than I could have, but I'm trying now. Like for the
mm,
past 3, 4 years with this YouTube channel I've created, I am just putting myself out there. It's unnatural for me to do so. And people will ask me, Joyce, how do you interview so many people? Like it's for an INFJ, you're actually really putting yourself out there. And I'm like, yeah, because I know that my natural inclination is to not act. So that's why I'm trying to individuate, because it brings
mm,
us all the way back to what you talked about. Carl Jung says that your personality type hints at your forms of one-sidedness. And the way that you can overcome this one-sidedness is to become more well-rounded. And so my whole life, starting the pandemic, has been trying to do things against my natural impulse.
mm. Wow. And I think that's so powerful for INFJs to hear, especially my INFJ sister who who would love that advice because that's gold. She recently had an ESFP friend, and that SE in the high slot absolutely gets people out their comfort zone, gets people out there and acting. And so a question I had, and just before we start to wrap up slowly, is from both ENFJs and INFJs, is having that self critical and perfectionistic tendency being in their head. How do they get more into their heart and how do they just get, yeah, into the world and more aligned to what they're doing?
Yeah, I kind of see it as if you put yourself out there, you're giving your bat signal up to the air. You know,
Mm.
with Batman, he has his bat signal when
Yeah.
people need him to be there. When we are able to do things that we are proud of,
Mm.
so for you, you're creating this wonderful podcast, then in and of itself, you will attract people who love your essence.
Mm.
So you have something about you that no one else can bring to the table. And so while all of the technicalities could be different, like I'm sure during this interview with you, I could have said a billion things better.
Mm.
All the
Me too.
details could have been refined. And so there's still the essence of us that's there.
Mm.
So the overall picture that we carry with us. And so people who like you will always be attracted to your essence, and the technicalities are negotiable. So it's
Mm.
like, you could have done that better technically, but to them it was perfect because for them it's what they needed to hear at that moment. It's your energy is what they needed at that moment. You have this soft, beautiful, warm energy to you. And I'm sure someone out there needed that. So, what you offer there to whatever you bring is is irreplaceable. And you kind of have to trust that you're not everyone's tea.
Mm.
So for 99% of people, you may not jive. But for that 1% who you could see as your soulmates, I kind of define the word soulmate as anyone you're compatible with on a very high level. Is that they'll be able to spot you because you put yourself out there.
Mm.
And so you are doing a favor for your soulmate or your soulmates, if you believe in many soulmates, by putting yourself out there. Because then they can recognize you, and then their compatibility with you can see you, and then you can have like people in your life that you're compatible with
Mm.
on a platonic level, on a romantic level, on a familial level. And so I just see it that the way that I get past perfectionism and I
Mm.
get past self-criticism is that sure, anything I do could be a million times better. And I agree with you, whoever criticizes anything I have to say. But ultimately, you are still there.
Mm,
And what you offer to the right person is always going to be perfect. Every manifestation of you, you when you're crying, you when you're happy, you when you're angry, you when you're saying things that are controversial, the right person will find that perfect. And that there are many right people out there for you. And so I just believe that there are certain YouTube creators that I think, like, I actually really like their older content more, and it's less perfect. And that's because they were more just being their silly selves. And when people become bigger content creators, they feel the urge to be more formal because now you have more on the line, and then now
mm,
you're scared to be more yourself because you have a lot resting on your shoulders. And so I find that the people who will actually like you will find you perfect in every iteration of your process.
mm.
So perfectionism is your own standard for yourself, but your soulmates, you already reached their standard of perfection because what makes you perfect is that you guys are just compatible from the essence up, and people can always feel that. Like as an NFJ, you feel people's vibes.
Mm,
So your vibe will always be the right vibe for the people who like your vibe.
mm. That's so powerful what you've shared. Wow. I honestly didn't even notice that you were an INFJ when I was watching you first because your FE was so strong, and I was like, I can't even do that. Like, in an interview, I was like, am I an ENFJ or am I just like an INFJ, right? So that's kudos to you as well, like for that. And there was one other thing, like yes, you were saying in one of your streams, actually before I started even putting myself on camera live this year, was I was watching you on a YouTube video, and I think you said that when you share yourself, no matter what you say, it's more like how you're saying it and the energy behind it, because that's a unique part of yourself. And that resonated with me so much. And that actually, was one of the reasons that caused me to be like, hey, I can give myself permission. So I think that was a really powerful thing. And I think it's very clear when you recognize it, but I think a lot of people maybe don't recognize that insight, and so it can be like a breakthrough in their reality. So thank you for sharing that. um I just want to, so I have like two quick questions, because I said I would ask them, if you're okay for time. um One was from my ESFP friend, which was saying, how does one follow their dreams if they have more than one?
That's a good question. So I would then ask them, what do those dreams represent about you? Why are those your dreams? And when you figure out as a coach, we learn about core value training. So this is about your FI. Figure out what resonates with your FI. Why are these dreams appealing to you in the first place? Do they have a through line? And so we are in the millennial generation, which means that having side gigs or having multiple jobs is commonplace. Most because we're broke and we need multiple jobs, but also because people want to pursue their passions and sometimes they have more than one passion too. And so I would say there might be a way to follow both dreams at once, kill two birds with one stone. It just depends on what is linking these dreams together. And can you create a thing that incorporates both these dreams? They actually have a saying for this that a lot of entrepreneurial businesses that work are because they're a unique combination. They call this the blue ocean strategy. So when you combine two unlikely things together, like two unlikely dreams together, and create a new dream that has not been done before, you're more likely to succeed because no one else is in that market. And so when it came to me on YouTube interviewing people of the different types, that was a new niche because people had not done that huge of panel interviews. Like I'll interview 9 ENFPs at once. And that set me apart because no one has ever done that before. So I encourage you to choose a blue ocean strategy
Mm.
by incorporating both dreams into a meta dream. They even say this about attracting a future partner.
Mm.
They say that you'll never be the smartest person, you'll never be the most athletic person, you'll never be the prettiest person. But if you mix multiple things together, you will be the only person that is the best at many things at once. And so it's easier to be the best at something that you combine multiple different things at. So that actually creates your unique niche where you have less competition. And so I would recommend that. Like you don't have to give up a dream to pursue another dream unless they're conflictual. Like you want to be an accountant and you also want to be, I don't know, what's a job that you
A
can't get?
singer.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's difficult.
Okay. I could do your maths and sing at the same time. I don't know.
But you
um,
could, I mean, like you could solve math ex on Excel sheets while singing, and people are like, I've never seen that before. That
True.
is
That's a blue ocean strategy, guys. Right. But sorry, I was solely taking you off track. Um, yeah. Yes, but you can follow the two dreams at once, right?
yeah.
I think that was the point you were getting to.
Yeah,
um,
I think that you mentioned something earlier about Ayurveda
yes.
and the complexity and the multi-dimensionality of everything. And so a lot of things in life tell us to live a one-dimensional life. And I think that's why people are so afraid of being boxed into one thing. They're like, I already have a million things in my life that want to box me in and trap me into one way of living. Like you're only allowed to have one dream you can follow.
Hmm.
And the thing is, the box is an illusion in some cases. So you don't have to have just one dream. You can actually go beyond that.
Hmm.
Find the creative third solution that you would like to live. Because ultimately, people will give you advice, but they don't have to live life like you've had to live your own life. So make choices that make you happy because you will regret it if you're 80 and you don't do that. So my whole YouTube channel has been motivated by my fear of dying when I'm 80 and not being proud of myself because I spent my whole life FE people pleasing and I'm like, "Oh no, I've secretly not been living a life that's meaningful to me."
And that's it. That's this process I'm in. Actually creating this YouTube channel, becoming a coach. It's that whole process, right? And yes, driven by fear of 80, but also like the universe is multifaceted. It has so many energies. Our bodies contain all of the atoms made in stars, right? So the thoughts in our head are also, multiple. So why not just let them all flow through? Um, you know, so we don't have to have that multi-dimensional life. So my last question, Joyce, is from an ENTP that I've been coaching, and she's really curious because she knows that you are trained in NLP. She wonders how much do you actually use NLP because she finds those if you find these skills, useful, and do you recommend for people who are looking to advance their communication to do that?
Yeah, I found NLP very helpful. And I find you can practice it in your own way. So they have the concept of meta model and Milton model. And what that is you can zoom in your questions to get more specific and detailed, or you can zoom out your questions to ask more broad questions. And it makes more sense to ask broad questions when you're trying to collect broad information and specific data to get people to question people's beliefs. So you can keep zooming in and zooming out to change the lens in which someone is seeing their life in. I also find timeline very interesting. NLP talks about look at your future, your present, your past, which is a general concept you can use, and then try to position yourself on that timeline to have the most impact. Like I'll do that future looking where I'm like, oh, me before I'm gonna die, and that motivates me. That would discourage other people. So there's that saying, what what softens a potato hardens an egg. And
Hmm.
so when you boil something, it can have a different effect on a different person. I know for some people, visualizing themselves when they're 80 just scares them more into inaction.
Yeah.
So I'm like, it doesn't help everyone.
Okay.
And so when it comes to NLP, they also have the concept of associate and disassociate. And so this is, you can either become when become attached to someone and codependent, that's you're too associated to them.
Mm.
But so you're disassociated from yourself because you're not caring about yourself, but you're associated to the other person. Whereas having more of an avoidant attachment style is you're attached to yourself, but disassociated
Mm.
from others. So I think that these are really broad lenses you can use to look at life in general. There's the VAK, which is the visual, auditory, kinesthetic. So you can use your senses. When someone's describing to you something, a metaphor or their life, you can ask them, how did that feel? How did that look like? How did that sound? And that creates a more multi-dimensional experience, and you can get more data from that. And so that is just the iceberg, the tip of the iceberg
Mm.
of NLP. And so I would say ultimately NLP is helpful because it lets you know that your filter of reality changes your experience of reality.
Mm.
And so they actually say that attraction is more mental than physical. So when we are infatuated with someone, it's actually more of our mental process than actually just their physicality.
Wow.
It's what we mentally make of their physicality.
Amazing. So much knowledge you dropped there. I have to watch this back to absorb it all. But I hope that was helpful to you who had asked that question. Um, Thank you so much, Joyce. It's been really a pleasure. There's so much things I could have asked you. There's so much more I think I want to ask you, but hey, maybe next time if you're ever up for a discussion. Thank you again so much for coming on. I know we talked about your YouTube channel, where people can find you. Where can they find you if they're interested in learning more about MBTI or even exploring more about themselves? Yeah, let people know where they can find you.
Yeah, you can find me on YouTube at Joyce Meng or Type Talks. And so I have a podcast format, a YouTube format. I offer coaching services and check out also both of our coaching services to promote both of us. So it helps us out and yeah, like, subscribe, comment. I'm I'm advertising you for you.
Ah, thank you so much. And likewise. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your knowledge and wisdom, Joyce. And yeah, hopefully connect with you another time. Thanks, Joyce. And bye, everyone.